And we are back. Now, before the break, Francis, we were talking about, before we go back to school, we were talking about some problems that are beginning to emerge out of the restrictions. One is the whole question of the capacity of the disciplined forces, that they are called, the people who are out there to enforce all of these things. I mean, do we even have enough policemen to go around? Because right now it's not uncommon to actually drive around for people who work in essential services like us. It's not uncommon for you to drive at night and not see any roadblock.
Absolutely, and it's very scaring. Scaring in the sense that you expect that you are on the road because there will be law enforcers, you know, patrolling and manning various roadblocks across the country. But that is not the case.
Easily be, because you could easily be coming from anywhere.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Actually, this raises security issues, security concerns, because it's not like thieves and other robbers have been isolated. I've not heard that they have been taken to quarantine. So they're still operating. I mean, we've had cases of shops being broken into. Yep. People are being robbed. I mean, I've even seen on social media people complaining that while jogging yeah, they have been robbed. Yep. And this raises a very serious concern. And also couple it with people have lost livelihoods. Yeah. People are desperate. Not that it is a justification to engage in crime, but raises serious concerns. It is also a capacity issue. How many police officers do we have in this country? About 100,000 or thereabouts. Yeah, yeah. So if you're talking about 100,000 police officers to do normal policing job during the day, at night to enforce the curfew restriction, and at the same time, we are now deploying more officers to Old Town and Isili. It means they
and
are
Nairobi and Mombasa and Kwale and Mandera and Kilifi.
Yeah. So you can imagine these are police officer who will work during the day, and at night that same police officer has to work. So you obviously, I mean, they're human beings. They will be overwhelmed. Even if you're to, let's say, bring in even all the NYS, even say keep the lions in the parks and bring out KWS guys, and say forests, bring out the forest rangers, you still don't have enough.
And you can't bring out all of them because poachers are also not in isolation. Absolutely. I mean, they would have a field day. Yeah.
It's a capacity issue, and this is a situation that we will deal with in the long run. Because suppose there's an explosion of infections in another town, what happens? And you have to lock it up. It means deploying more officers. Like today, for example, if you go to Isili, all the inlets and outlets in Isili are manned by officers. That means you have more officers being deployed there. So capacity issues will be a big, big problem. And maybe there's need to think further on how to deal with this.
Joe, additionally, I think fatigue is a problem that is going to set in, because the police service is totally stretched. Remember, before COVID, the biggest peacetime operation for security services, and I mean the Kenya Police Service, is the election. And the election takes a day or two and counting, and
it is determinate. You know when it's going to end, and you can plan for it.
Yes. Now, we've had 42. We're going to do 42 days of what qualifies as a national emergency. And I think it's time to actually go to areas that I think this country regards as either sacred or things that are untouchable. And I'm looking at the Article 241 of the Constitution on the defense forces and the role of the defense forces. Article 241.3 says the defense forces, 241.3b, shall assist and cooperate with other authorities in situations of emergency or disaster, and report to the National Assembly whenever deployed in such circumstances. I think I should read the rest of the article, because our defense forces are a service that is waiting to be used in situations of emergency, situations of disaster, and I think COVID-19 meets that. I just said earlier that if we get 2-3 more places like Old Town and Isli, you can't turn to Mutiambai for numbers. He won't have them. You can't milk those police officers. They are running out of energy. you have to turn to Article 241 of the Constitution and make use of the service that is called the Kenya Defence Forces. And don't tell me it's not doable. We just deployed 7 to City Hall.
It's doable, but it also attracts a lot of interest. And this will also require parliamentary approval. This is the discussion that our parliamentarians must have, whether it is time to deploy the KDF or not. And also, look at the training parameters for police officers and for defense forces. Look at places where KDF has been deployed. Talk about Mount Elgon, for example. You remember the Sabot Land Defense Forces?
That's a different situation, Francis, because it is different. It was an
emergency situation in that area, if you were to look at it in that context. And so what will the defense forces be brought out of the barracks to come and do?
Let's remember.
There must be precision and clarity. Otherwise, we may end up with a scenario that is not very pleasing at the same time.
Oh, wow.
I think what we are used to is when we see soldiers, we think war, we think beatings. I think there's a role for disciplined services even in peacetime. That is why you have doctors from the military, for example. We know very well military can build bridges, for example, in areas that have been swept away by floods. They can perform peacetime civilian duties. We are not going to ask them to come out with their anti-aircraft artilleries and tanks and all that, but they should come out with any such equipment that allows them to assist in this disaster, and in especially enforcing movement restrictions, which are clearly a challenge as at now to the services that are on duty, which is the Kenya Police Service.
Wow, an interesting conversation. I'm not too sure we'll resolve that debate here, but definitely this is calling for out-of-the-box thinking, things that we haven't thought about, we haven't thought possible in terms of just making sure this happens. But I wanted to go back to the story of education because it's caused quite some debate in the country. We've seen, for example, the very disproportionate way in which learning is taking place, if you were to take it that way, that some people are saying the inequality in our society is becoming so clear right now when you look at how learning, if it can be called that, is going on now. I mean, there are people who are able to access online resources, they're able to do their classes on Zoom and all of these other platforms. There are people who can listen to the radio and perhaps watch TV. There are people actually who have no idea what is going on. And now the whole question of school fees has been added to this. There are schools that are saying, you know what, second term has started. Here is the invoice, Damila.
Yeah, you've brought up a very important issue, Joe, because Minister Magoha alishtumiwa sana about this issue of online learning and radio and television, with people telling him, as you said, a huge majority of children in this country, tangu shule zifungwe, hawajaona kitabu ama hawajapata chance yote to get any form of education. That's one. And because if you look at the situation in a lot of places in this country, even Yvonne talked about the research that was done by Population Council and the Ministry of Health about how life is in 5 slums, I think Kibera, Huruma, Kariobangi, Dandora and Mathare. 4 out of 5 people either lost their jobs or they've lost partial income. And then most of them, the one thing they keep thinking about is what to eat. Over 68% of them have skipped a meal. Those are the things that are going through their minds. Where do we get our next meal? Where do we feed those children that we're talking about that need to be getting an education? And now when you hear private schools are asking for school fees for online learning, and it's something that Minister Magoha is upset about, and he says, no, hakuna masomo. When I talk about a directive, I'm applying to both public and private schools. And then we have now other schools that are teaching a different system of education. I know for a fact that some of those schools, or most of them, are actually going on with their education kama kawaida. Their calendar is ongoing because that particular segment of the population is able to afford to have their children continue with online learning. What does online learning mean? You need to have at least a computer or an iPad. You need to have internet access that is strong and stable for you to be able to have your child continue with lessons as normal. This disparity is what is actually bringing a huge issue. To fanya what Waziri has said, today I actually agree with him. Our children's health and well-being is more important than masomo. Let us finish with COVID-19. then we can look at now what would happen going forward with it.
There's some tweet that was actually going down the bottom of our screen that was saying that dead people don't do exams.
Absolutely. In fact, and today, what I liked about what CS Magoha said was, I mean, what he did today, he was candid. He was clear. You remember there was a lot of criticism directed his way when, number one, he said that as far as he's concerned, online learning is going on. I mean, that was a fallacy because the inequalities that Jamila is talking about have been there over the years. I mean, how do you explain a scenario where children in public schools in urban areas vis-a-vis their counterparts in the rural areas who are learning under trees or in dilapidated classrooms and so on and so forth have to do the same exam with their counterparts, even in the primary, I mean, in the private schools. So that inequality is not new, only that it has now been brought to the fore because of the situation that we are in. So that was a fallacy, number one, that online learning was going on, because even if it is, it's a very small component of our students that is actually enjoying it. And number two, the facilities. Are they there? Are there facilities enough to enable all our students learn? I don't think they are. And number three, talk about even internet penetration, mobile phone penetration, and that story about TVs are available. I mean, not everyone has a TV. So if you have one, don't make assumptions that everybody does, because that is not a fact. And number two, when we say that there is even a designated likely date of reopening schools, 5th of June or thereabout, there was some confusion because people are asking, okay, so what has been used to arrive at the June 5th date? So today, there was clarity that I don't know, which should have been the answer from the beginning. So let's deal with COVID. I don't know when we are likely to go back. When that situation is dealt with, we will go back. And I saw some interaction with members of parliament today. It was a bit more civil
than the previous day.
Than the previous times, because members of parliament were able to engage with him. Yesterday, the House was very heated, and members of parliament were actually accusing Professor Magoha of arrogance. There are some sound bites that Effie prepared there for members of parliament yesterday who were very furious with CS Magoha.
I sat in the appointments committee, Honorable Speaker, under your chairmanship, when CS Magoha said that if he will not be able to perform, he would rather resign. CS Magoha, if there is something that stops you from delivery today, resign.
But Mr. Speaker, the problem we have with the Ministry of Education, we have a CS who is addressing children and parents the same way, Mr. Speaker. He thinks parents are like children.
The schools in Garissa, I've just seen a statement, the schools in Garissa, now the people who live in the schools are the ones who are from the flooding of Tana River. There's no radio. Let's not cheat ourselves. The Minister of Education must come out clearly and even tell us this exam he's saying he's not going to postpone. It's like he knows when coronavirus is going to end.
We want to hear that any time lost will be recovered through physical learning because the country is not prepared for any online learning. Mr. Speaker, unless you're Babu Owino and you know DYDX and you remember all these things.
Yeah, that's, I see Yvonne remembering DYDX. I have zero memories of those things. But it shows you the seriousness of the matter. And today, at least, the country can relax. You're being told if you have kids in primary school or in secondary school, stay with them at home. Let them stay there until such a time the COVID-19 situation is dealt with. That is a relief. However, what also I liked is that there was clarity on whether parents will pay school fees or not. Because as this situation was going on, some schools were asking parents to pay. So somebody was asking, is there a Ministry of Education private schools or Ministry of Education and Ministry of Education public schools? Because what was that being paid for? So today he said it's a service charge and it is not mandatory.
Yeah,
it's on pro rata basis. Those are good things to say.
Yeah, but even this COVID-19 has not caused the inequality in the education sector. It only
it's amplified
It's helping us
How
actually
many
take
times
note of
have
the
we
fact
done
that
stories, Joe, of people learning under trees?
Yeah.
Even when we were talking about free primary education, access to schools, these are things we have done constantly where they don't even have a blackboard. People are, teachers are drawing in the sand to teach their students. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but once again, empathetic communication. Parents are scared, they're confused, they're being asked for money. Students are wondering. I mean, I think we even had the story today of the students in that was done by Raquel Muigai. And many of the students were saying, I think I'm going to fail. And so in some ways, when you have a person in a position of leadership that speaks, today was a welcome change, but that speaks to people like, I don't know if it's Madarao, it's, as far as I'm concerned, online learning is going on. I am the anointed voice. This is what's going to happen. And then when you say we will open schools on June 4th, and then, no, they will not, but the exam timetable has not been changed. No, they will not. Today we're talking about a service charge. These are just some of the things that continue to cause anxiety, enrage parents, and they don't know. Here's what I would like to see. Is it possible for the CS Education and his team at the ministry to speak to parents' associations, to speak to teachers' unions, to speak to TSC, to speak to secondary school heads association, all of these, meet them, hear from them, see what they're saying. There's a private schools association, I believe.
Capture.
Yes, and hear from them and come up with something that says, you have been heard and we are doing this together. And yes, we don't know what the future will be, because even now when he said, there will be a service charge, so who's to say that, the schools will now say that 80% of school fees we're asking you for is indeed the service charge that we're speaking about. I mean, I just think there's
at least you opened a window to say you don't have to pay.
At least you don't have to pay, yes. But, to sort of have that conversation, because a lot of what's happening is reactive. So after all of these things have been said, schools are asking for school fees. And I bet, here's another thing that we have not thought about, that the teachers are also wondering whether they will get salaries because there is no school fees that is being paid.
155,000
of them, and it is a valid
schools.
concern, but it's just that is something I just think that needs to change going forward, and not just from the Ministry of Education, but from
but we also
it actually ought to be tidier than that. In my view, there is only one disaster called COVID-19, which is affecting the entire country. But what we are seeing is probably cabinet secretaries let on their own to each try and come up with whatever solutions they can to their ministries. And we've seen briefings. I mean, yesterday we saw the CS for transport saying his bit. I think if there exists, as does a national emergency
response
team,
committee,
that should be the consultative think tank within government, so that they come out with coordinated and coherent steps when it comes to whether education or transport or these restrictions, because it's going to be very untidy if you have Magoha giving different answers, because obviously he has to think on his feet, and you have Mutates Kagwe sounding increasingly like John the Baptist preaching, let's do this to no one.
Yeah.
That task force, the team that is supposed to be in charge of this whole thing, in other countries, by the way, those task forces are headed by the president of the republic. You see the president in Uganda leading his. You see Donald Trump, however erratically he's leading his own team. Here we are seeing a bit of a disjointed approach. And I think we're in a more critical phase right now than we were when the first case was confirmed. Because this can either get worse or get better, and therefore we need a roadmap to the future. Now we need to see a more tidy communication, more tidy operation from government, led no less by the president.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we can't go home without talking about what is beginning to happen that a lot of people had forgotten about, which is politics, and it is happening in the president's party. Is it still a party, by the way, Francis? But lots of things happening there.
Many things were expected to happen, and they will continue to happen. And unfortunately, politics does not understand disasters. There will be politics even when disasters are here, because you'll hear, they say politicians plan for the next election. And as far as we are concerned, we haven't heard of any information about postponement of the next election. So people will keep talking about it. And I am not sure what remains of Jubilee for now, because the divide is clear.
The name for sure.
Yeah, the name, yes, but the divide is very clear. And it will continue that way because, as we said earlier, both sides are looking at very different things. The president is on his way out. He's thinking of his legacy and his exit. On the other hand, his deputy is thinking and planning of 2022, the succession. So there will be that conflict. And it began way earlier. What we are seeing now is a continuation. And it can only get worse in terms of the friction as we move on, because the interests are different, they are divided, and that is the reality of the day.
But Linus, why can't they just say, you know what, this thing is not working, let everybody go their own ways, and they start organizing themselves? Because it looks like, save for the disaster that we have now, and everybody is sort of focusing on COVID-19, right now we'll be seeing a bloodbath, political bloodbath actually in Jubilee.
Actually, the bloodbath is on. It's only
under the radar.
You know, it's taking place.
It's in isolation.
You've heard of the dark alleys where, you know, people on a pigwangeta. That is going on right now in our politics. And the unfortunate thing about our politics, it operates like a separate strain of COVID-19 because it's so persistent and it mutates. It mutates in actually faster than COVID-19 because. When you look at, in terms of a weekly basis, it takes a different form. You look at what is going on with the CPAC.
CPIC,
counties,
yes.
Yes.
Public Accounts and Investments Committee.
Yes.
In the Senate.
Where my Senator Ledamo Lekina has just been de-whipped.
Yeah.
Look at that, because those are nuances of what is taking place in the larger environment, because Ledama happens to have been endorsed by Jubilee, and not just Jubilee, but you know, there's Jubilee Kieleweke and there's Jubilee Tanga, and it appears
and it matters which one endorses you.
It matters which one endorses you, and so his party disagreed with this, asked him to resign. He refused to resign, and he has been de-whipped. Now, whipping, I must talk about that term, and Francis.
I was going to say, like, it's a misnomer. Like, the guy it was more like whipping than the whipping. But
yes, because whipping is a term that comes from the Westminster system of politics. It comes from the UK, and basically it means enforcement of party rules. The chief whip is actually very powerful, more powerful than the party leader. You have to listen to what the chief whip says, because they do things like what has just happened to Ledamo Lekina, which is removal from all the committees that he was in. And this, we are going to see a lot of this happening, because like I said, our politics is mutating. You also saw the change of tone of Mbadi and Jeanette,
yes.
Very critical of government. Just a few weeks ago, both of them sounded like very good government spokesmen. Big change. Mutation.
Wow.
You see the mutation, just a bit, the mutation that you're talking about. Look at the whipping that you're talking about in relation to the senator for Narok, your senator actually. He has not only lost his membership in the Public Accounts Committee, but also in the House Business Committee. And the crime that he's purported to have, or said to have committed, is not towing the party line insofar as the choice of the party for the chairmanship of the Public Accounts Committee in the Senate is concerned. The preferred candidate was Professor Sam Ongeri, the senator of Kisii. But he cut a deal with senators from Jubilee. They went there, ambushed Ongeri, and he was voted in. And so the party was not happy. That very same day, you remember that letter written by James Orengo, the minority leader, disowning the results. If it was a democratic process, how do you then disown the results? It simply means there was an expected outcome. And when that expected outcome didn't materialize, the de-whipping process began. And you see, political parties, much as we say we are a democracy, I don't think we are a complete democracy. I don't know, this is where you talk about guided democracy or democracy that is owned. Because Standing Order 190 is what has been used. And sometimes these laws favor the party owners, so to say. The Standing Order simply says it is the prerogative of the political parties to determine who sits in which committee. So in this case, when the ODM party is dissatisfied with the conduct of Ledama, it simply invokes that standing order and
whipping is not logical.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had not completed talking about a bit of its history.
Yeah.
Because it was used in England during hunting season. There's someone called a whipper in.
Mm-hmm.
His duty is to keep dogs or hounds in line. In line. You can't stray. Now, it's not a very logical thing, is it? You don't ask the dog why you are straying. So that is the history of whipping. And it's a most powerful, probably the most powerful standing order in the House. It gives parties a lot of power.
We need to wind up, Joe.
Plus, when parties don't like something, I mean, where parties work, they actually, like in South Africa, the party, ANC, has recalled a president before. So there are places where the party actually will step in and do things you may not agree with, but it is the party. Okay, we
need to wind up, Joe.
Thabo Mbeki, yes, we will. Thabo Mbeki was recalled.
Yeah.
And they made it sound like they're going to give him another assignment.
Yeah.
He's still waiting.
So they recall you and then
Zuma as well?
You are not president anymore.
As we finish, I'd like to say something written by Viola Muluka. She says, I hope this gets to Newsgang. My phone can't tweet. It got here. I'm a high school teacher and spoke to 2 of my students today. They're from Budalangi and currently holed up in some camp in a school due to flooding. How can they learn online? There's floods, there's hunger, there's anxiety, and of course we know that about 200 people have died from floods in this country, and over 100,000 others have been displaced in Budalangi and Busia and Garissa and Tana River. In fact, in Garissa, they're living by the side of the road, and it's a very sad state of affairs, and it makes me sad that this would probably happen again next season, and the one after that. We always have these extremes of floods,
famine, and just to add, out of that, 8,000 acres worth of food has been destroyed so far.
So it's a
in fact, it's a bigger crisis.
Is that
only that we are not talking about it more often.
Yeah.
But when you have 200 people dying from these floods, then it shows serious concern. Exactly. But now the problem is, even next year there will be floods, and the year after, and after these floods we will have drought. It's a cycle that we have every year, and it's extremely unfortunate. Maybe we need to do something about it.
I think so.
And maybe we need to go home.
We need to leave now, but now we need to do our final words. I think today we're starting with Joe Ageo's uncle.
Sure.